I'd like to pivot a little to talk
Yeah.
about some of your newer work around integrative development, which I
Mm.
think is a nice segue as you're moving from the individual
Yeah.
to more systems thinking.
Hmm.
Uh, can you describe for us what you mean by integrative development, and how is that different from other concepts of professional or personal learning and development? What's the distinctions you make with that?
Yeah. So it has there's two phases of the development of the work. I used to do a lot of large scale change projects for famous companies like Nike. I did a lot of reinventing government projects for state and federal government, uh, and in that, I got to the point towards when I was really at the peak of that part of my career, where I'd have clients for many years as they'd move between jobs. They would just bring me with them, and in the end, some of them even just say this: "Just come be David." And I don't even care what you put on your. And like the activity of creating a new business card. Like, how do I describe what I'm doing without having a business card that's this big, right? And so initially, integrative development came because I realized that I was at my best and I did my best work for my clients when I was freed from having to stay within one silo as a coach or trainer. And what was happening was I was just moving between roles to kind of in real time work with what was emerging, whether it's with state leaders or a work group or a big project. So it originally began, could I combine training, coaching, and OD, organizational development, into one practice, which is essentially what I was doing. And I had an occasion with a client who ran a large organization that served disabled children, which was the first one I got to name this way. And they had invited me to come and teach coaching skills to all of their managers and leaders and supervisors in the organization. And I turned down the offer. And they said, "We've never had a consultant turn down an offer." And I said, "I know how hard it was for you to get the funds for this project. And I don't think that a coaching skills program is what you actually need." And so then she said, "Well, what do we need?" I said, "I don't know, but let's go find that out." And so we had a little work group put together. And long story short, we ended up creating the first full ID project. And that's the other half that I'll tell you in a minute. But and we worked for 2 years. They were extraordinarily successful to the point that they got the state legislature to change policies in line with what they were doing to free more organizations to work like they were working because their results were through the roof. And it was basically moving away from a medical mindset to a coaching mindset in terms of how they ran their entire organization. But it was all driven by team-led projects, not by me and my training. And they basically changed themselves with my support across 2 years. And so in that, I was always changing roles: grief counselor, advisor, parent, just always in the moment. What could I do with this person or this group to liberate their potential to go do some things in new ways? Out of that, I began to look at narrative coaching and look at these projects and say, there's something happening here in terms of how I'm thinking about learning and development. So the second half of ID, which is the book I'm nearly finished with, is really about the second half. So I'm really glad I took this long to get here with the book, because it's now a much better book. And the basic premise here is that the best learners on the planet are infants and children.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, and ironically, despite the effort of many amazing teachers, by the time they leave high school, they've forgotten how to actually learn.
Yeah,
And
that's the tragedy of education.
it is.
Yeah.
And so many of the biggest sources in the book are child psychologists and child educators: Maria Montessori, Moshe Feldenkrais, John Dewey, others. Because children do things and then they learn about what they've just done, right? Adults believe I have to know before I can do. And so what I'm trying to do through ID now is bring this spiritual philosophy that's in narrative coaching to help you be able to liberate the learning potential in any moment. So in my programs, like for clients, we don't have curriculums, we don't have agendas, we don't have anything other than all the resources we need, a clear understanding of what's going on. And so it's the ability, and we've got some really cool models around developmental thresholds now, to basically help structure any moments in time and turn it into a learning and development laboratory for that person. Because otherwise, there's two major problems. Well, there's many problems, but two of them are we keep sending changed people back into unchanged environments, which the environment always wins. So we develop things, have them change to an environment. But secondly, you could have 30 people in the room ostensibly there for the same reason on the same topic, but they have 30 different learning journeys to be on. There's no curriculum that could ever write that would meet all 30 of those needs. So I don't know what you need until we discover what you need, which means we have to put you into action and then help you notice what isn't working. And then we use our resources to help you discover how can I improve in this area so that I can learn what I need to learn to get better at what we're trying to do as a group. And so ID becomes now, some of our students are doing absolutely amazing projects. I spent the last month right before the pandemic with all the top leaders for the Victorian government in Australia for a month. These are the most senior people in the government. We had no curriculum because they were in their worst bushfire season in recorded history. The pandemic had already come. They had unrest on a variety of fronts. What curriculum could I ever create for them that would be remotely useful for them? There isn't any. It'd just be more recycled stuff. And so what they really need is they feel isolated, they feel under attack, they feel overwhelmed, they feel a lot of things. And so they need each other. They need company, they need collaboration, they need candor with each other. And then out of that, as we move through these different iterations of programs we had, they would begin to identify, now I see what I need. Great. And then we'd say, is there anybody else? We look in the room. Who else is already really good at this? We pair them up. Go talk to him.
Yeah.
He's an expert at this.
He's been down that road already. Yeah.
Yeah. And so he can mentor you or coach you or whatever. And then 3 or 4 people have the same interests. Great. Here's some resources for you. Go talk to each other. Figure out how you can help each other. And I was able to use some of my practices from my retreats to do some really daring kind of things for them to develop themselves. And what, it was the biggest project I've ever done like that. There were a few kinks. It wasn't perfect. We learned a lot. And one of my telltale signs of success was they had higher levels of engagement from the most senior leaders than they'd ever had in any of their memories. Why? Because we weren't trying to teach them anything. We were helping them to learn.
Yeah, and learn about something they cared about.
Yeah, you bet.
And that's without that, so you've really turned everything upside down essentially in the way.
Yeah, well, and there's actually a lot of data to support this, and so I did a couple of government projects and that which demonstrated this, and then I found research later from Marshall Goldsmith and a few others that in most organizations there's an inverse relationship around learning and development between what they invest their money in and what actually has impact. The bulk of the budget for most organizations is the program itself, which by far has the least impact on outcomes. And the piece that has the most impact on outcomes, which is follow-up and support, gets by far the smallest allotment of money.
Right.
So in our projects, we actually it takes some work for some clients because they're used to old patterns. It's not easy for them to change, but all of my successful projects have involved clients who are courageous enough to go against the grain to align the budget for our project with what we knew was actually most powerful for the participants, which it created disruptions in systems. And, and so like I would charge them more for follow-up small groups than I was for programs, which was completely mind-blowing to them. I said, because the programs are not going to make any difference. Trust me, I've done these for MBA programs, I've done these for clients all over the world. The programs have almost no impact on most people in the end. And if you what you're after is outcomes, trust me to give you the things that I believe will create the greatest outcomes. And that's where my expertise will be most helpful to you. Anybody can create a decent program.
Yeah.
Not everybody can create powerful outcomes. So for me, like I said, every client who was willing to go into that space and co-create a budget and a strategy was way more effective than the ones that said, just show up and do this leadership program.
Yeah. How many people have gone through a leadership program and could even today tell you this much about what it was about and whether how
No,
it impacted their lives?
most of them would have forgotten most of it by the end of the week.
Yeah. I always
Yeah.
felt that, that going back to children is that I almost wrote a book a number of years ago, but it was collecting stories about children who were doing remarkable things leading.
Huh.
And we started collecting. We started. It was when the Chicken Soup for the Soul, and we were
Oh
in
yeah.
discussions with them. And I started collecting stories from people, and people were telling me remarkable stories about something that an 8-year-old kid decided that there was a problem, and they wanted to
Mm,
fix it.
yeah.
They weren't the poor kids didn't have turkeys for Thanksgiving, and they went to the grocer, and they went here, and they put this whole thing together and said they didn't have to go take a leadership course to learn how to do that. You
Right.
know,
Right.
they did it because they saw there was a need, and they just figured it out as they went. And yet
Mm,
somehow we think adults need to somehow go through training to become leaders,
yeah.
when we just need to teach them to be maybe a little more courageous and step out and
Yeah.
try new things.